Thanks, Jim.
I'll introduce myself. I'm Jim Conca. Thank you.
Can you give us slightly more detail?
Well, after a 30-year career as a research scientist, I now find myself asked to give perspective. So I'm going to give perspective. And that is the mic on? Yes, I'm just not very close to it. All right. So anyway, I'm sorry. I should be just watching it. So the problem as it stands. Radiation risks to humans and the environment are assumed to exist as a result of any exposure, no matter how small. So that's one of the problems. Exposure to natural background is on average about 3 millisieverts per year, although global regional averages range from 0.03 if you're on a carbonate atoll in the Pacific, not bikini, then it's 0.03 millisieverts per year up to 100 millisieverts per year in places like Ramsar. It's not possible to see statistical evidence of public health risks at exposures less than 100 millisieverts per year because we're pretty much well below the noise level of all other risks faced by humans or the environment, and I want to go over that a little bit more. Regulations require nuclear waste disposal, which is my expertise, systems to meet release criteria, especially the 0.04 millisievert per year to down gradient drinking water supplies with no regard to cost or unintended effects. Of course, LNT, we don't need to go over that much. I actually started my career as an exobiologist, so I was looking at the origin of life and the evolution of biomolecules into cells. And one thing that is never talked about much is the fact that when the eukaryotic cell evolved about 2.3 billion years ago, when oxygen was coming into the atmosphere and we had about 10 times the natural background radiation that we have now, pretty much it responded to both of those things. So it has an immune system that's actually not bad, especially dealing with radiation effects. At that time, background was more like 100 millisieverts to 200 millisieverts per year, and it dealt well with it pretty well. So what are the costs of regulating radiation doses to such low levels, especially the 0.04 millisievert per year in the down gradient drinking wells for nuclear waste cleanup and disposal? So I want to kind of switch that question to how much do we consider the value of a human life to be? Well, if you're EPA, you consider that to be $7 million. That's what most of these calculations are about, $7 million to die from environmental effects. If you're look at the health care payout for most people, it's about $316,000. Sometimes people spend a lot more on that, but that's the average health care paid out over a life in America. If you look at the historic legal value from a attorney's standpoint, it's about $129,000. That's the payout in wrongful death suits on average, although some celebrities get a lot more than that. But that's the average payout for a wrongful death suit. If you're a deceased soldier, you'll get $12,420. That is ironic and horrible. Although, depending on how you die, you can get more than that. This is the big one, though. Of course, if you take someone healthy, chop them up, and sell them on the black market, they're worth $45 million, which is actually not bad. And who wants to see me later? That's good. But really, the reason that the LNT issue is such a big deal, and this was posed by several people, of course, today, is that we spend about $2.5 billion to save a theoretical human life to the levels focused by LNT. Okay, so LNT does not determine these limits. It kind of forces them, but it doesn't actually determine them. So again, we spend that much to save a theoretical human life over the next 1,000 years, and that might be fine. We're rich, that's great. However, this is where the ethical issues come into play that you've alluded to, is that if you spent that same amount of money to save one virtual life in the next 1,000 years, you could actually immunize most of sub-Saharan Africa and save 25 million lives from the three biggest scourges, measles, diphtheria, and whooping cough. So this is an ethical issue. I mean, you might say, okay, well, we're rich, we got lots of, I mean, Hanford, come on, $3 billion a year budget, we can handle this. However, you really should be saving people's lives, actual people's lives. So just these are the numbers, and you have to kind of fit in there where you think your value comes in. So our regulatory limits are so far down in the noise, and this is one of the issues. I mean, it is really amazing how you can tease data out of noise, tease the signal out of noise. But that's all you're doing. You're really just teasing. You're really down in the noise, and it just doesn't matter. So from a practical standpoint, I just want to step back a little bit and say, well, what is this noise? What's important? Should we be spending this time, effort, and money on dealing with the noise? So, but then another thing is that people rarely consider that LNT demands that there be an observable effect. It demands it. It's not like, oh, well, sometimes you don't see it. It's okay. No, LNT demands it. If you look at data like this and you don't see an LNT effect, you have to. LNT demands that you see an effect, especially if you're talking about 200 million people. So if you have a constant dose change over that many people, you must see, LNT demands that you see an effect. So you really have to step back and say, well, how come we don't see it? What does that mean if we don't see it? You really have to see it. So, and people say, well, something else is going on. Yeah, something else is going on. It's called a threshold. So something else is going on. And if something else is going on, then LNT is not correct at those levels. Okay. And the same thing here. So again, you've seen this data over and over again. The fact that below about 100 millisieverts per year, you just get into the noise, and the noise is noisy. So I'd like to talk about radiation risks are best considered relative to more common risks. So I like to show this to the public especially, but just shout out, what do you think is the most dangerous thing on this list? Just shout it out. That's one of the top four. One of the top four. Okay. Iatrogenic. What the heck is iatrogenic? Well, you all should know because you're over 50 in general. It is medicine gone wrong. It is not malpractice. It is not malpractice. Properly prescribed, properly taken prescription drugs, proper surgical procedures, just don't know why the patient died. Okay, so it's not malpractice. That's a whole separate thing. Opioid addiction, completely different thing. And I have that on here too. So, and again, you look at some of this and why food poisoning? Why are we still killing people with hamburgers? I mean, that is really stupid. And that's a lot of people, okay? Nuclear industry, one, yeah, that's really bad. Now, a biostatistician gave me grief for not normalizing to the subpopulation. Okay, smoking really is the worst, always has been, always will be. The lungs do not like breathing burnt carbon particulates. And so, okay, but there's not that many people smoking anymore in the U.S. Alcohol's up there. Iatrogenic now falls a little bit because so many people get medical procedures during the year. Accidental falls, this is really bad in getting up there. And I did it. And I hurt myself. And I had to have surgery. Not good. Police work, yeah, there's not that many police officers. 800 isn't a lot of deaths, but there's not that many police officers. Same thing with mining. So, and it's nice to know that eating is only slightly more dangerous than nuclear power. Supposed to get a better laugh than that. So anyway, but what are the costs? I mean, if people want to know costs, and it's kind of hard to tease those out because LNT has been around so long, it's worked its way into everything. So dramatically that it's hard to say, well, what does it cost you as a society? So we're going to talk about a few things. One, commercial nuclear industry, it increases the cost and increases the fear of nuclear power to the public. That's the main cost to the industry. Environmental concerns, of course, fear prevents nuclear power from addressing issues like climate change, human health, and the environment. Nuclear waste, it increases the cost of repositories, it prevents siting at the most optimal geographic and geologic locations. So now everyone's so afraid of it. We're not going to put it in the best place because that would be horrible because there's some people there that really are afraid of it. So it kind of limits our choices and hobbles us as to what we can do. As scientists, we know what we should do. We're not allowed to do it, so have to pick the third option or the fourth option. And of course, because of that, the costs increase. Medicine, again, you went over that very, very well, thanks. And then emergency preparedness. This is an interesting thing. The cause of extreme radiophobia after accidents, or even release like plutonium particulates from Hanford site last year was trivial. I mean, literally it was trivial, but it got everyone very excited. And even something like a future dirty bomb attack. I don't like to think about dirty bombs very, very much. I'm an expert on that. And yeah, it's the fear that causes a dirty bomb to be an effective weapon. It's totally about fear. You cannot get a dirty bomb effect where the rad does anything more than the bomb. Okay, a good-sized car bomb that'll kill 100 people, even if you had, 250,000 curie, you spread it over the billion square feet in a 10-block area in downtown Manhattan, the dose drops to not much above background. So again, it's a fear issue, and that's why it could work so well. We've had 2 attempted dirty bomb attacks in the world. I don't know if you know that. One was foiled and one was failed. So the extreme radiophobia following a nuclear radiological issue, loss of lives, occur with the frantic evacuation like at Fukushima, where it was pretty much unjustified. Increased suicide and psychosomatic disorders. We saw that after Chernobyl in a big way. Unnecessary permanent abandonment of properties and or for contamination well within the levels of Earth background. So again, this is going to cost us. I mean, you might think of the cost sociologically, but the cost economically is huge. And then the extreme costs of cleanup relative to actual risk. So Fukushima is the best example of this. The government evacuated 160,000 people from provinces surrounding Fukushima, resulted in about 1,600 deaths, mainly on the elderly and disabled, and mainly from basically ripping them off of life support and other things and moving them where they should not have been moved. According to the World Health Organization, there's no acute radiation injuries or deaths among the workers or the public from exposure. The lifetime radiation-induced cancers are much smaller than the lifetime baseline cancer risks. For about 160 workers who received a whole body effective dose over 100 millisieverts, expected cancer increase will not be detectable in the normal statistical fluctuations in cancer for this population. Now, you probably heard there was one guy died recently from Fukushima radiation. Anyone actually believe that in this room? Anyone believe that? Because he died of lung cancer in his 50s in Japan. Yeah, it was, yeah. So again, but now this is the first Fukushima-related death administratively. Okay. Over 50% of the residents have finally returned, mostly older citizens. Government estimates the cost of that at over $200 billion. So again, there's the first number I'm showing in terms of cost. At an average of $39,000 per capita GDP of the evacuees, revenue losses since 2011 exceed $40 billion for that cohort. $12 billion in compensation was paid out to displaced residents. Unnecessary shuttering of all the nuclear plants, most, of course, without any risk at all. That increased the fossil fuel use by about 25%. That has its own issues. Increased energy prices about 20%, and lowered air quality significantly. Estimates, you can believe this or not, about 15,000 additional premature deaths from fossil fuel use, especially coal. The interesting thing about the government lowered the radiation limits on food. Now, after an accident like this, you usually raise them temporarily, right, if there actually is an effect, and then you bring it back down. But they lowered it. So and I want to point out the foodstuffs lowered to 100 becquerel per kilogram, which is very funny because I know the government already exceeded those because I know they were handing out bags of potato chips to evacuees. And you know that potato chips are about 350 becquerel per kilogram. You know that, right? Potato chips, the most radioactive food. You know that, right? Potassium 40. And of course, as you're drying out the potato to bake the potato chips, so there's no water left of the potato chips. So it's a really great calculation, and a few people have done it. So potato chips are really, really bad if you care about this kind of thing. Unfortunately, this lowering of the regulatory limits on foodstuffs destroyed a lot of the farming and fishing industry in northern Japan, even in areas that were completely unaffected by any radiation. That was about $10 billion in losses. But with its own Chernobyl effect, the Fukushima disaster proved to make the fisheries off the coast a de facto marine protected area, and the fishing stocks have tripled in these waters since that time. Just like Chernobyl, it really shows the really bad contaminant is human beings. You get rid of them, everyone does well. So in terms of the waste disposal costs, the main effect has been to completely stop our nuclear waste disposal program because of fear. I mean, it has just stopped, okay? We're doing some things, but really not accomplishing much. It gave us glass over grout for high-level waste. Anyone know this issue? Even though grout is a lot better. Okay, the waste in Hanford tanks is the wrong chemistry for glass. It loves to be in grout. Hanford vitrification program, not including the repository costs, will exceed $90 billion versus $30 billion for grouting and disposal elsewhere, and $30 billion for grouting in place, if you care about that, even though there's no statistical difference in their risks. It's made it impossible to cite a repository and has prevented us from correctly reclassifying high-level waste in Hanford as transuranic, which it is now. Unnecessary engineered barriers at places like Yucca Mountain, titanium drip shields, $30 billion for the titanium alone, and it has increased the disposal costs over $200 billion, just to meet L&T determined limits. Okay, we'll go to Hanford here for a second. If you don't know what high-level waste is, it's bomb waste, okay? It's not power waste. Anything from the nuclear power industry is not high-level waste, period. It's only bomb waste. And there's only two types of bomb waste, high-level waste and transuranic waste. When you're making a bomb, okay, you put it through a weapons reactor, not a power reactor, a weapons reactor, and you then dissolve the fuel up and separate out the plutonium. There are several steps there. The first two, the waste from that goes into high-level waste tanks. That's high-level waste. It has all of the fission products and a little bit of uranium plutonium. The rest of the steps are for polishing plutonium and uranium. So there's not many fission products there, and that's called transuranic. Okay, so those go into other tanks. There's about 150 high-level waste tanks, or what used to be high-level waste tanks at Hanford, and there was originally about 20 transuranic waste tanks at Hanford. Now, fortunately, actually, since 1970, most of the cesium and strontium, the hot, significantly half-life hot fission products have decayed away, 1 or 2 half-lives, and we removed half of them in the 70s and 80s, so it's not high-level waste anymore. Okay. Now, you'd think that would be a good thing to know, right? Because high-level waste disposal is infinitely more expensive than transuranic waste disposal, but we haven't done that mainly because of L&T and the fear of radiation. So if we look at the important aspect, and I'll focus on the 4 millirem per year, whole body in water down gradient. This is the edge of the Columbia River, the edge of the Hanford site at Columbia River, where most of the effluent from leaking tanks or anything else would come out over the next several thousand years. Sorry about this. DOE did an environmental impact statement for the tanks, okay, and they're only allowed to do certain EISs. They can't do it on all the EISs they want. They can only do it for vitrification and shipment to Yucca Mountain. So whenever you do an EIS, you have to have a no-action scenario, right? You do nothing. You walk away from it. You might fill stuff up with gravel so no one falls in an open tank or something, but you just walk away from these tanks, right? This is the most highly contaminated place in the world, according to some people. And if you walk away from the tanks, your peak dose at the river's edge is 4.37 millirem in the year 4978. Does anyone believe 3 significant digits to this number? Notice there's no error bars on it. They purposely do not include error in this, even though most of the work that Judith and I did in the 1990s to get that number had errors that were anywhere from 100% to 1,000% at every parameter that went into that modeling. So you can believe 3 significant digits. I don't believe 1 significant digit. It's about 10 plus or minus 50. Now, if you vitrify this waste and ship it to Yucca Mountain, all of the others show that it drops to 0.9, 0.8, 1. So it goes from 4 to 1. Okay, and you're going to spend $250 billion extra to get that peak dose at the river's edge from 4 to 1 millirem per year. Is that a good use of $250 billion? Well, I mean, if you work on the projects, it's probably good, but yeah, so again, this is the issue. So these numbers are so low. I mean, if anyone thinks the health risk to the public in the year 4000 or the year 3000 is different from 4 millirem or 1 millirem? Does anyone actually believe there's a significant difference to the population in 1,000 years between 4 millirem a year and 1 millirem a year? I mean, all you have to do is move to Spokane from here, and you'll get 50 millirem a year more. And that should be outlawed. But I like hockey. Okay, so okay, now all you have to do is grout in place, and we actually did this EIS a while ago, and you drop from 4 to 0.9. You just grout the tanks in place at a fraction of the cost. I mean, but can't do that because L&T has driven the fear of the public, especially the state regulators, to the point where they will not even consider this at all. I mean, it was thrown out years and years ago. Okay, so if we look at, and let me wrap up here. If you add these all up, essentially you get to a $420 billion savings over the next 70 years if you raise the waste disposal and waste cleanup from 15 millirem per year to 100 millirem a year. You'll save $420 billion. So everyone wants to know the cost. That's one of the costs, and that's just for the U.S. It's about $1 trillion if you look at it worldwide. Thanks.